We have a great question here from Rolando who asks, how much information is actually needed to take trading decisions? Have we ever felt over flooded by too much information that we aren't able to take any decisions? Is there any tips that we can, how we can deal with this? So I think this is a fantastic question, Rolando, especially, how it relates back to the terminal as well, how we can use the terminal to try and conquer something like this. And this is an issue that I'm all too familiar with. It's actually a lot more common than you might think. There's a name for it. It's called analysis paralysis. So it's basically when you are overthinking and overanalyzing all the available information so much that it prevents you from actually making any decisions. Now, and it applies to both fundamental analysis and technical analysis, right? The idea is exactly the same. It's when you try and consider too many variables in your analysis, and it ends up either giving you conflicting signals or conflicting information, and it causes you to just overthink and overanalyze things that might not be as complex or as complicated as we make them out to be, and it causes us to have indecision. And it really goes, as I said, for both fundamental or technical analysis. On the fundamental side, you might have this specific premise and bias for a particular currency, and then you start reading something and you read something else and read something else, and suddenly you've got these conflicting bullish and bias opinions, and you're just not sure what to make of it. Or from a technical point of view, you might be seeing let's say you have that downside or upside bias from the fundamental direction, and now you're trying to just take a trade. Then the daily is telling you that it's not the right time, but the H4 is telling you it is, and the weekly is telling you it isn't, or you've got two indicators and one is telling buy and the one is saying sell. It can all be very confusing. And more importantly, it can be very energy intensive and energy zapping when we find ourselves in that situation, because we're trying to go to and fro, trying to figure out whether it's this or that. Should I be trading now or not? It can be very frustrating. And the challenge with us as traders is that it keeps us back from great trading opportunities that should have been an easy choice, but instead we just overthink and overanalyze and end up messing up a perfectly good trade, or just not taking it at all. And I think the key is to really try and find balance. You see, from my side as an analyst, I'm an analyst first before I'm a trader. And what that means is that it's my job to highlight risks associated with any particular opportunities, if that makes sense. So, it's not just enough for me to have an upside bias for the euro dollar or downside bias. I need to be aware of the type of factors that poses a particular risk to that particular trade. So we are essentially going through more variables than a regular retail trader would, if that makes sense, right? So looking for risks to your trades, I think, is always a very good way of minimizing your risk, is a good way of doing risk management. I think risk management goes a lot farther than just having a stop loss. It also goes into analyzing what might happen so that you have a better chance of managing those positions. Now, of course, in doing that, it might mean that you place too much emphasis on the risks as opposed to the logic or the premise behind the trade. Now, in my opinion, I would rather err on the side of caution, and make sure that I engage the market for the right reasons. I'm fully aware of the risks associated. But, in times, it can mean that you look at too much information and you start overthinking it, and you start just, doubting in your own process. You start doubting in your own analysis, because there's that conflicting view in the market. So, for me, the one thing that has helped me in this area, and I did struggle with this a lot, is I tended to look for perfection too much. I think being more analytical minded has a tendency to cause you to struggle with this a lot more. So I'm not sure whether you're also more of an analytical thinker compared to a more natural impulsive thinker. But me being more on the analytical and systematic side of thinking, I succumb to this quite a lot, because I often open up myself way too much for the open information or the available information that's there, and always trying to look for that perfect reason to trade, right? That perfect trade, that perfect analysis, that perfect entry. But you need to realize that there's no such thing as a perfect trade, right? Oftentimes we try to find the perfect trade and the perfect fundamental reason to trade and the perfect entry, But the truth is, when it comes to trading, there is no such thing as a perfect trade. Perfection can't really gel in an environment where there's that constant uncertainty like the market. It's very rarely that there will be a perfect trade opportunity. We basically we deal with the available information that we have, and we try and find those opportunities where we think the possible reward outweighs the risks. And that's really all to it. That constant struggle for perfection really drove me crazy for a long time. And I had to realize that there's no such thing as a perfect trade. There's just the next trade. And we can only account for so much. Another area that helped me to overcome this is having a trade plan. So you've done your fundamental analysis, you've written down your premise for the trade, you've written down the rationale, you've highlighted the possible risks, you think that the premise outweighs the risks, you've looked at the possible chart entries and setups, etc. You've identified your risk. All you can do then, once you've established that you do have a positive expectation for the trade, you simply just execute the trade in line with that trade plan. So by having a set plan on how you look to trade, I think it takes some of that indecision away, because you are following a set process for identifying and planning and executing and closing a trade, instead of trying to look at too many things at once. Something that can also help here is trying to identify where the overthinking or analyzing is coming from. So oftentimes, in my case, when I've had a few losing trades in a row, I tended to overthink and overanalyze these subsequent trades, and that started to play with my mind. So do some introspection as well. Make sure that the reason that is happening might not be due to some losing trades that you've had. If that's the case, the best thing to do is just have a reset. Make sure that your psychology is back on track before you re-engage the market. It's not always easy, but if you sit down and think about it, you'll start to find out what might be bugging you. And try to dissociate your next trade from your past trades, if that's the case. Know that having losing trades is totally part of the game. Even if you have a high hit rate or success rate of 70%, statistically speaking, you still have a very high probability of having 3 or 4 losing trades in a row. And that's just the statistics playing out, the external factors that causes you to lose those trades. So, and I think, putting all of these things together, that's for me where the terminal is so ridiculously helpful, because you don't have to go far outside the terminal to try and find great trade ideas, right? Between the market insights alone, looking at the dominant currency sentiment themes every day, looking at the tradable sentiment shifts, the sentiment drivers reports, the video commentary, the webinars, all of that I think just gels into a nice confluence of information, and really all you need to formulate great trade ideas. And in those times when you've done all of that and something fits in your trade plan, but you're still just not sure whether you should pull the trigger, then I think that's where the Q&A is so helpful for the videos, as well as the webinars. In those times when you're really just not sure, you can always just pop up a message, and you can use us as a type of soundboard for your trade ideas. I think that can really help you gain more additional confidence in that particular premise once you've heard someone else's opinion on that particular trade idea as well. So I hope that helps with the question. Any other questions, please don't hesitate to let us know.